The Indonesian National Revolution, lasting from 1945 to 1949, was a 4-year period of desperation, greed, conflict, and complication, eventually resulting in the official creation and independence of the fourth most populous country in the world, Indonesia. From Sukarno to Japanese occupation, to the British intervention to the Renville Agreement, this is all about the Indonesian National Revolution in 10 minutes. Before we delve into the details of the Indonesian National Revolution itself, let's rewind 350 years to understand how the Dutch landed in an archipelago 7,000 miles away. In 1602, multiple European countries, including Portugal, Britain, and most notably the Netherlands, set out on voyages to find spices and increase economic output. The Netherlands' Dutch East India Trading Company, or the VOC, was the most successful in this by colonizing Indonesia. Once they settled in the archipelago's vast and largely untouched land, they continued to take advantage of Indonesia's rich resources without many obstacles for hundreds of years. Tragically, to achieve this success, the VOC enslaved natives and committed genocide, which slowly but surely triggered uprisings from native Indonesians and the Netherlands' allies. By the 19th century, the Dutch government had taken over control of Indonesia from the VOC, which collapsed in 1799, and were expanding their economic output and political influence at extreme rates. The two most populous islands of Java and Sumatra were entirely transformed into colonial societies, while many of the thousands of other islands were being used for harvesting resources. Millions of slaves were being abused, and people began noticing. The first uprisings against colonial rule began in the early 19th century, most notably with the Javanese War of 1825. In the late 19th century, revolts and riots became increasingly common, with activists such as R.A. Kartini and Chokro Aminoto rallying support from native Indonesians. Unfortunately, most of these revolts were fruitless because of the omnipotent Dutch military, and often the Dutch simply responded to these revolts with more violence and harsher working conditions. On July 4th, 1927, a man by the name of Sukarno, who was studying engineering in college at the time, established the first Indonesian Nationalist Party, or PNI, with 7 of his friends. The PNI was founded with the sole purpose of overthrowing the Dutch government for rule over Indonesia. Within 2 years, the PNI had garnered hundreds of thousands of supporters and about 10,000 members. However, their large support caught the attention of the Dutch government, who quickly acted by arresting Sukarno and his fellow leaders, dissolving the PNI. In late 1930, an attempt was made by Muhammad Hatta and Sultan Syahrir to revive the PNI as an educational committee, but they too were arrested 1 year later. Despite the PNI being an unsuccessful campaign, it showed the Dutch that Indonesians were ready to fight for their independence. During World War II, the Dutch military was greatly weakened by heavy battles with the Axis powers, and thus they were forced to make the decision to retreat troops from Indonesia. Japan saw this as an opportunity to utilize the rich land of Indonesia and promptly sent troops to the archipelago, easily taking control. However, Japan's occupation of Indonesia was different to that of the Netherlands. Japan was well aware of the potential economic benefits Indonesia had to offer. So, instead of enslaving and oppressing the Indonesian people, the Japanese took a more peaceful route. Don't get me wrong, World War II was still a horrible experience for Indonesians, with millions being killed as a result of famine. But direct Japanese-inflicted deaths totaled to much less, at around 40,000. By maintaining relatively peaceful relations with Indonesia, they gained each other's trust and began working towards reaching Indonesian independence. By March 8, 1942, almost all Dutch forces had retreated out of Indonesia, largely thanks to Japanese intervention. With an increasingly improving relationship between Indonesia and Japan, Sukarno and Hatta, both former PNI leaders, worked with the Japanese to form the Indonesian National Committee, or KNIP, and began drafting a declaration. Following Japan's ever-weakening power in World War II, Sukarno and Hatta came to an agreement with Japan to declare the independence of Indonesia on August 17, 1945, marking the beginning of the Indonesian Revolution. This proclamation was soon followed by Japan's surrender from World War II on September 2, 1945, and all Japanese forces retreated from Indonesia. Japan's retreat meant that, for a short period of time, Indonesia was unoccupied by any foreign forces. Capitalizing on this freedom, Sukarno assembled an Indonesian National Army, or TNI, within a few weeks, anticipating another foreign attack. Unfortunately for them, that foreign attack came sooner than expected. Just 6 weeks after Indonesia's self-proclaimed independence, 30,000 British troops arrived on the coast of Java. You might be thinking, what do the British have to do with this? Well, the Netherlands and Britain had come to an agreement in which British forces would temporarily occupy Indonesia while the Netherlands was recovering from a state of destruction caused by World War II. Then, once the Netherlands had recovered and restructured their military, they would swoop in and regain control of Indonesia. Unfortunately for the British, temporarily occupying Indonesia proved more difficult than expected. A couple days before the British arrival in Java, a message was sent throughout the island urging everyone to flee before it was too late. When the British arrived in East Java near the city of Surabaya, they encountered quite the opposite. Within 5 weeks, Sukarno had managed to assemble 20,000 infantry troops and nearly 150,000 youth volunteers to hold back the British forces. A large-scale battle broke out through the streets of Surabaya, lasting 3 weeks and killing around 14,000 Indonesians and 2,000 British. In the end, the British succeeded in capturing Surabaya, but it had come at a great cost. In fact, due to the unexpected strength and aggression from the Indonesians, the British decided to remain neutral for the rest of their stay in Indonesia. For the Indonesians, their devastating loss gave them a newfound sense of nationalism and rebellion, leading their army to grow to almost 150,000 by the time of Dutch return. After 1 year of relatively peaceful British occupation, the Dutch made a return to Indonesia, taking on the land controlled by the British and ready to control more. Following the return of the Dutch, the British forces returned to Britain, their men and artillery supposedly not needed anymore. However, the Dutch had been gone from the islands for almost 5 years, and a lot had changed since then. Despite unexpected challenges and heavy fighting, the Dutch, under the leadership of the legendary Simon Spoor, were able to regain control of about 2/3 of Java and Sumatra, the two main islands of Indonesia. The Netherlands may have been satisfied with the situation in Indonesia, but neighboring countries of Indonesia, such as Australia, and even Dutch allies such as the United States, were not. The world had just gone through history's largest and deadliest war, so the last thing countries such as the US and Australia wanted was another unnecessary war. Provoked by sanction threats by the US, the Netherlands agreed to a compromise, dubbed the Linggadjati Agreement. Signed by both parties on March 25, 1947, the Linggadjati Agreement stated that the Republic of Indonesia, consisting of Java, Sumatra, and Madura, would be part of the Netherlands-Indonesian Union, while the rest of Indonesia's islands would remain under the Netherlands' control. Confusing, I know. The problem was, the Linggadjati Agreement only lasted for 3 months. By July of 1947, the Dutch government had had enough of the Linggadjati Agreement because they claimed that the Republic of Indonesia took advantage of the agreement to establish foreign relations with countries such as China and Japan. So, instead of trying to form another agreement or create an amendment to the existing agreement, the Dutch launched an attack on Java and Sumatra, dubbed Operation Product. Operation Product was the first of two politionele acties, or Agressie Militair Belanda I, as the Indonesians called them, and it completely violated the Linggadjati Agreement. The Linggadjati Agreement was meant to act as a ceasefire, and the violation of it triggered minor sanctions from the United States and Australia on the Dutch economy. Operation Product ended on August 4, 1947, eventually resulting in Dutch victory and the recapture of major parts of Sumatra and Java. However, getting to the end of Operation Product killed thousands and destroyed infrastructure, and the Dutch were soon urged by the UN to come to an agreement with Indonesia. After months of negotiations, the Renville Agreement was eventually signed on January 17, 1948, with the United States as the moderator of the agreement. The Renville Agreement demarcated the so-called Van Mook line, creating a clear border between Dutch and Indonesian territory. This border split Java into 4 parts, 2 of which were put under Dutch control and the other 2 put under Indonesian control. All of Sumatra was put under Indonesian control, while Indonesian Borneo and smaller islands were given to the Dutch. Following the signing of the Renville Agreement, internal conflict arose within Indonesian territory, but Indonesian-Dutch relations remained peaceful until December 1948. Driven by greed and jealousy, the Dutch launched their second politionele actie, dubbed Operation Kraai, or Kraai, a surprise attack aimed at obtaining Indonesia's temporary capital of Yogyakarta. Despite successfully capturing the capital, hindsight proves that Operation Kraai was the stupidest decision in Dutch East India history. Following the operation and violation of the Renville Agreement, the United States threatened to halt all World War II recovery support to the Netherlands, which had already totaled to over $1 billion in 3 years. Driven by severe threats from the United States and several other nations, the Dutch and Indonesians met at the Dutch-Indonesian Round Table Conference on December 27, 1949. After over 4 years of revolution and decades of trying, the Dutch officially transferred sovereignty to the United States of Indonesia. The Indonesian National Revolution came to an end, and the archipelago was now a globally recognized independent country. The complex period that followed the Indonesian National Revolution was marked by both victories and difficulties. The nation of Indonesia set out on a journey of nation building and consolidation after its independence was recognized in 1949. Diverse communities and regions were brought together in an effort to unite the archipelago into a single nation. Political insecurity persevered, with different advances between various types of government. The new nation had to rebuild after years of conflict due to poverty, a lack of infrastructure, and other social and economic issues. Policies to boost social welfare and economic growth were put in place by the Indonesian government, but progress was slow. In spite of these difficulties, the Indonesian public unrest established the groundwork for a sovereign country, and the soul of freedom and solidarity turned into a fundamental piece of the Indonesian personality. The legacy of the revolution continues to shape Indonesia today, bringing to the people's minds the struggle for freedom and the ongoing commitment to national development.